So one of the things I want to highlight is our emphasis on data, and I think there's been a lot of interest placed on the nature of algorithms and on the statistical methods that artificial intelligence, or what I might call automated decision making systems, tend to have. But I think our argument today is actually that it's the data that serves as the foundation for all automated decision making systems, and where we see bias, discrimination, and exclusion, it's typically in the nature of how data is managed, collected, how decisions get made about how data can and can't be used. The real foundation of these systems is data. And I think it's more than an issue of just having more inclusion or diversity within our data sets. I think it has to do with scale as well. So too often data systems by design ignore or actively erase the in-betweens and the outliers. So if you're different, if you don't fit neatly into how our society is structured today, if you're on the margins, then you actually fall into the margins even more within the nature of these data systems too. I think that until we have data that's relevant to, is owned by, and governed with the communities who are most impacted by automated decision-making systems, we're going to continue to perpetuate inequality and exclusion. It's not just enough to include. We have to address questions of ownership, of governance, of self-determination, and of equity.
It's the user's data that is collected and sold. And except for the global north and a few developing countries, most users do not know what their digital rights are. And I'm speaking from the perspective and the context of Pakistan. And rarely are they enshrined and protected in our laws or constitution. So this collected data is fed into that databases that then targets the users through AI. Internet giants, governments, and social media companies become more and more powerful, and the average user is left with fewer and fewer avenues and way to exert their power.
There's a broader realization that data is a tool of exploitation and exertion of power over workers, and that we need to think about it differently, that it can't just be this relationship between the worker as a body that sort of is available for data to be extracted from, and that they have to have a greater say, greater ownership, greater control, greater agency and over how their data is being collected, used, managed, what it's being used for. And in that context, we've been exploring models that allow workers on platforms to do that. That's what we call data stewardship broadly, and there are nuances within it and lots of debate about what data stewardship is and is not. But for us, it is the ability to unlock the value of data. And of course, there's a lot of debate about what the value of data is, but to unlock the value of data for the community, for public purpose, and do so in a way that rights as defined by different regulations are protected, but also such that the data principals or data subjects have a say in how their data is being used and managed.
The goal is not for workers to get data about themselves. The goal for workers is to have more power so they can stand up to the people that employ them. And I think we see this happen in a lot of conversations about data. It's basically the collection of data and the use of these various new technologies that, for instance, allow for jobs to be cut into smaller jobs and to kind of decontextualize work so that it becomes easier to swap out one gig worker for another, which obviously benefits the company way more than it does the gig worker. Like, that's not a new thing. That's a thing that predates the data, that predates these technologies. What these technologies allow companies to do is exploit more, to basically consolidate their power and extract more value from the workers. But we need to also take a step back and ask, hey, do we even think it's a good idea for corporations to have this much power about their workers? And if not, do we want to maybe organize our economy in a different way? And there's some very obvious examples here of worker co-ops where workers share ownership of the company rather than the company controlling all the assets and the capital.
I think when people talk about decentralization, there's definitely a focus on the technology, cryptocurrencies, community networks, decentralized storage, things like that. But when it comes down to it, what actually matters and what creates the alternative web and future web that we want is thinking about how do the people who use the tools make decisions? How are the people building the tools getting funded? How are they getting paid? What gets me excited about it is actually the part of the decentralized web that is being built by social enterprises, which is this umbrella of nonprofits, cooperatives, public benefit corporations, and startups that are building the infrastructure to enable other decentralized projects to emerge. It's sort of this web, this interoperable, interdependent web of infrastructure for other decentralization projects to emerge and to be resilient.
So there's, this kind of very kind of radical idea of volunteer-based mutual aid that is underpinned by language of deep solidarity and kinship. So drivers call each other brothers on the road. They say we might not be family, but we're thicker than blood. And we have, this is sort of our soul calling. This is the purpose of our lives, is to help each other out. And they were organized around spatial stations. And so they've carried this form of kind of spatial meeting spots and transformed them into what they call base camps that have really become, these DIY shelters where drivers meet together and hang out and trade information. So all these relationships are not just online. And these base camps have really become anchor nodes in this web of relationships.
And what is probably one of the most novel or innovative aspects of DSA, it is trying to focus on the core issue when it comes to content distribution and moderation, and that's that data harvesting business models of certain actors that over the years managed to gain a significant level of control over public sphere, over users' choices, if we even can speak about users' choices. And this is that interesting shift that we finally see in the regulation making that we have been asking for a while.
I'm a firm believer in people power, and I think when it comes to enforcement of policies and when it comes to this radical rethink of the business model of the internet, rethinking and reimagining is only part of the work, right? The remaking, the actual doing is what's going to make the difference, and that's going to take time. It's going to take time, and it's going to take people power, honestly. Amnesty, we did a poll in 10 countries in 2019 to look into how people feel about the corporate power, the power of big tech, and how their data is, how much their data is collected, and how it's used, and whether that concerns them. And 7 out of 10 people, this is from countries from all regions of the world, said that they felt concerned and uncomfortable about how much data is being collected about them and how that data is used. And so I think there is this momentum, there is this sort of awakening, this awareness building about the power of big tech, and people don't want the current model. They want a different model, and in order to create a different model that truly serves the people rather than the pockets of a few companies in Silicon Valley, we need to make sure that internet is designed by the people.